Um, okay, awesome. Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Aditi. I think you've said some really nice things, but I guess the goal of what I'm going to say today is just making sure everybody understands that, EB1s, O1s, all of this is quite achievable, and it's basically just having good understanding of what is required and working through that. So, yeah, just to start on the outline and one disclosure on my side, just to be super cautious about things. Yeah, we'll have 30 minutes. I'll give you a very high level overview, going through everything about my background, what I had, and then what it took me and my attorneys to kind of make the EB1 work out, fortunately. And then after that, happy to answer any questions. Just want to add the mandatory disclaimer that this is not legal advice. It's just me sharing my experiences. So hopefully it can help all of you better understand what is required for these sort of extraordinary ability applications. There are certain specific details which I guess my attorneys won't be too happy with me speaking out publicly. So during the Q&A, I'll happy to answer as many questions as possible. But if there's something which is super detailed, we can chat after this one-on-one. I'm happy to share contact information regarding that. Cool. Okay. So with that, it sounds like 22 minutes. I can get started. Um, I know a few people in the past have prepared slide decks. Apologies on my end, I do not have that, but I have a template which Charity kindly shared. So hopefully that should be informative for all of you. So I can maybe start a bit about my background and then a bit about what I, hope are the major takeaways from my experience. So I, like most Indian or like most immigrants who have come from a background of engineering. I did my undergraduate back in India. I studied electronics engineering, graduated in 2016. And in the same year, without any work experience, I decided I wanted to come to the United States for a master's degree. A minor detail which might be important later on was that my undergrad was in electronics engineering, but I wanted to specialize in the field of artificial intelligence. There were a lot of advances happening even back then, and it also aligned with my interests. So I decided to transition over my master's program to be working more on computer vision, natural language processing, and reinforcement learning. I think NLP these days is called large language models. You might not hear that term as much, but it was still quite an exciting space to be in back then. So I did a master's degree. It was a course-based master's. There wasn't any research involved per se, but I did volunteer for research and teaching assistantships, working with some very well-renowned researchers in the field of reinforcement learning and computer vision. I did an internship as part of my program in a pretty cool company. It's called Unity. They build the game engine, and they were basically building AI AI kind of environment for testing agents in the games. That was a very fun experience, but more importantly, in terms of EB1, I think what worked out well was my project was relatively well received. Unity presented at a conference, and there was a big YouTube video and news article on the broader project, not just what I worked on, but like the broader Unity ML agents, which was quite great. So yeah, I got some industry experience through my internship, and then I decided that okay, I want to work on this full time. I was considering a PhD, but my hypothesis back then was, and this is completely wrong, just my personal opinion. This might be completely wrong, but I felt that given the pace at which my area of interest, different subfields of machine learning was moving, it might not be a bad option for me to be moving to industry working on AI. And I could always come back and do a PhD later on if this is not something which I really liked. So yeah, I then started job hunting, and I was looking at opportunities working as a machine learning specialist rather than a typical software engineering sort of role. And luckily for me, I got a role at Google, which was pretty interesting. It was a customer-facing machine learning role. So we worked with a team of consultants and cloud experts on delivering machine learning solutions to Google Cloud, big Fortune 500 companies. I ended up taking the role. I joined in 2018. I was there. I worked on a lot of amazing things and gained a lot of experience. I'm very grateful for that. In 2020, so 2 months before the lockdown started, I decided to transition internally within Google, and I joined what was back then called DeepMind, now Google DeepMind, as a research engineer. So the title moved from machine learning engineer to a research engineer. And yeah, since 2020 till right now, I've been at Google DeepMind. I worked on a bunch of what I think is super interesting applied machine learning projects, not core research, but applied ML projects. And I've been fortunate to have learned quite a bit from that. So that's a brief overview of my background. So in relation to today's talk, what I think the main takeaways I want to give is that EB1, there's a bunch of criteria. I won't spend too much time going into it, but there's the EB1B criteria. And well, an interesting way of actually introducing it was when I was, back at Google, when I just joined my team at Google, I met a bunch of folks who also from, backlogged countries. And they told me that, oh, I got my green card last year. And then I was like, oh, congratulations, how did it work out? And they told me that they got their EB1B outstanding researcher visa. And I was like, hold on, you also just had like an undergrad or a master's degree. So how did that work out? And it turns out, yeah, thanks, Aditi. EB1B is the outstanding researcher route. So, if you look at the criteria, it sounds like you need to be a very well-renowned academic, a professor. But I ended up meeting a lot of people who had just like a master's degree, who were working for Google for a few years, and they just ended up getting this. And that's when my confidence level kind of went up. Okay, this is something that is quite doable. So with that anecdote, I'll get into like how I did it, and I assume how other folks have also, gone through that route. But the points I specifically want to highlight as part of the talk is that, as Arati briefly mentioned, you do not need a PhD, right? You do not need to be a postdoc or, have like thousands of citations. That's another very important question a lot of people bring up, because I think the citation criteria is something which is the first thing that sticks to most people's mind. So I had, honestly, I think less than 100 citations when my application went. I think it did grow after during the application, but I had less than 100. Um, there are other things to focus on, which are not as well, I would say, known or advertised. And I assume this is the criteria which most folks, similar to me, working in industry in their domain of expertise, have been exploiting. Okay. And the second thing I want to mention is, and we'll go cover this in a bit, is that my domain of, for something like EB1A or B, they're going to ask you what your domain of expertise is. In my case, it was machine learning, artificial intelligence. That domain itself is quite broad. So it's something which I think is quite reasonable to use. But before you apply for these kind of green cards, it's important to understand what are you good at, what is your area of expertise, and clearly define that, and then build all the criteria on top of it. Okay, we are 9:15, so we're 15 more minutes on time. Okay. So coming a bit to what my timelines were, and I'm going to each criteria. So as I mentioned, I came here in 2016 on an F1 visa. On 2018, I was quite fortunate. I was initially on F1 OPT, which allowed me, I think, 2 or 3 years of being able to work as part of my graduate program. But quite fortunately, my H1B got picked in the first attempt. So I immediately moved to H1B in October of 2018. And I was also fortunate. I worked with, my management and, my leadership team at Google. They also filed for my EB2 visa, EB2 green card. Now, for some countries, EB2 is quite backlogged. Even today, I think for India, it's in the 2010s or something. So there's like a greater than 10-year backlog. But back then, I was pretty ignorant. And I was like, okay, fine, just apply for it. We'll see what happens after that. So in 2018, my EB2 was applied for, and then in early 2019, it was also approved. So I had an I-140 by then. So at this point, I was like, okay, great, but what does this mean? And talking to immigration experts and lawyers, it means that you just wait. And I was like, okay, how long is the wait going to be? It's like, well, we assume it's going to be a few years. And then um, doing a bit of research, I quickly realized a few years can mean like a decade plus. And this is just something which is I'm not quite as comfortable with. I do like the region where I live in, the Bay Area, and I can assume that, this might be my home for, a few more years. So, given that I want to live here, being shackled by, these visa stamping, and every time if I want to change a job or change my location, having to keep updating this and be at the mercy of the government, that wasn't something which I was super in favor of. At that point in time, I just go back home. So I had a few choices. I could either put up with this and just enjoy it. I could leave, move back home, go to a third country, or I could just work and figure out what I could do about it. And that's when the EB1, I got to know about the EB1 program, asking a few of my colleagues at work. And once I spoke to them, they did mention to me that, listen, um, I think you have a good chance. Why don't you tell us a bit of your profile, what your background is? I explained that to them that I have like, back then I think I had like 10 or 20 citations or even less than that. And they kind of told us what they did. And I think now I'm coming to the meat of the talk at this moment. So what I started doing initially was looking at, there's like 8 to 10 different criteria. I don't know how many exactly I can. Yeah, I think there's 6 criteria for EB1B. Um, Back then, I didn't care too much about EB1B versus EB1A. I just wanted to look at more generally what can I do to improve my profile. And most of them seem to be things outside my control. For example, things like citations or media. I really don't have much control over that, right? So what I ended up doing was focusing on things which I could build the foundations for in my early years, and then see how things organically happen on the side. And that's the belief with which I went with that, right? What kept me through this was that, even if my visa gets rejected, whatever I'm doing will help me improve, become a better AI researcher or, make me more well-renowned. So it's not like it's lost work if it's rejected. So that was my main motivation going through this. Okay. So coming to the criteria itself, so this was like, I think, right before the pandemic, or I think during the pandemic when I was quite, I had free time, like I guess most people. Um, so I started looking at the criteria, and then one thing really struck to me, which was quite doable, which was evidence of judging the work of others. I'm trying to read it right now. But basically, it's a criteria that, as individually or in a panel, you judge the work of others in the same or allied academic field. I was quite fortunate in the sense that I had a lot of requests for peer review for papers coming my way. I had previously rejected most of them, not thinking I would have the time. But once I confirmed from different colleagues that serving as part of something called the Technical Program Committee, which is judging papers and workshops, conferences, or academic journals counted for this, I just got started. I was like, okay, cool. I got to stop procrastinating and start, actually doing something. Plus, it would also make me a better researcher. So I started peer reviewing. And long story short, I started with 10. I think as of today, and I don't want to, like make it look like this is what you need, but I've done over 100 peer reviews at top machine learning places like NeurIPS, ICML, CDPR. I think CDPR. I need to check, but like a bunch of different conferences and workshops and journals I've reviewed, and I think this was one of the strongest criteria which my lawyer used over here. The second thing, which I think I lucked out on quite a bit, but I feel would also come organically, was I started figuring out opportunities to publish some of our work in my organization in Google. I think there's a lot of amazing work happening in the area of tech, but I was in the group that did not publish as much, but I think it was mostly up to me to figure out how can I take some of the work we are doing, which is a reasonably good scientific innovation, and then publish that or work with the other folks involved to publish that in top venues, right? And that's something which I consciously got started on. I also found opportunities to work with different researchers. Now, I wasn't on the core like academic research group, but there were other research groups in my organizations who were working on similar things, and we had opportunities for hackathons, etc. Um, so I worked with them, and fortunately, a few of these collaborations ended up being actual submissions to journals, which were accepted. And not only were they accepted, but some of them received significant media attention. And these were like big venues. So for one of the papers we published with Liverpool Football Club, it was published in Telegraph, I think different places. I wasn't like a leading author, to be clear. I think I played a reasonably small part in it, but my contributions was clear in the paper. And then in all of these articles, they had linked to the paper, and in the paper, my name was there. And I think that worked out well for me. So um, I had a few papers, and then the papers received media attention. So these were two things that were also hit, right? But what also happened with this was on my professional network channels, I started receiving a lot of requests for, hey, we really found your work cool. Can you, talk to us about it, right? And again, usually I used to let most of my LinkedIn messages, there was so many, I just couldn't like reply to all of them. But I started consulting with different immigration experts, and they mentioned that if you are featured in the press and it talks about your work in the field, that could potentially help in this criteria. So I started responding, obviously working with my companies. We have an entire comms group and making sure everything was in compliance, and started doing these sort of interviews, sharing more of my background, sharing more about my work. And I think that very well complemented the publications. Again, I didn't have too many. I didn't have many citations, but I had publications that was featured in the media, and then I did media articles also talking about them, right? And the final byproduct as a result of this is I started then giving tech talks also at universities. And this was mostly from a mentoring point of view, but I also was told that this would also help, and people were very interested in learning some of the cool research which I think we were doing, and that also hit some of the criteria. So I think to kind of summarize first from the immigration point of view, we are now in 2021, early 2022. I have done a bunch of peer review. I think we had like 70 papers reviewed at that point. I had a few papers out that had media attention. I'd done a bunch of tech talks also, that, there were Spotify podcasts. There were different podcasts about my work that was also there. And at that point, I'd received one award, I think. That might have been after my case was already submitted. But I had some attention in that criteria as well. So at this point, I go to my immigration lawyers, and they're like, okay, listen, to be honest with you, this is one of the weaker criteria. You don't have a PhD. Typically most candidates have a PhD, but that is different from all candidates need to have a PhD. Nowhere is it written that you need to have a PhD. But I talked to them. I kept working on the profile for the recommendation, and then they kind of told us, listen, we can submit a file. We'll get all the recommendation letters. That's another additional requirement. You'll need a bunch of recommendation letters from folks. You'll compile all the evidence. We wouldn't keep your hopes high too much. Again, given that you don't have the sort of tenure as a professor and you just have recent work. I had less than 3.5 years of total work experience at that point. But let's see how it goes. So we submitted my application in, I think, mid or late 2022, and it was approved in less than a quarter. I think less than a month. I'm not sure on the number, less than a month without premium processing. Um, there was no RFE, fortunately. Again, I feel like I think there was some aspects of good fortune also involved over here. But we submitted the application, got all the recommendation letters, took my latest resume and all the details and all that, and I had an approval. So I don't have much to share on the RFE response point, unfortunately, but I can share a bit more on what else I did to kind of make this work in the remaining 3 minutes we have. And then I see a bunch of questions here on the specifics. I think we can talk about that. Um, what do I want to highlight more generally? Yes, I think the recommendation letters, those are quite important. I'm not sure if they are explicitly mentioned or not, but if you think you have done great work, right? If you think that some of your work in the field is reasonably good, um, I think most people over here tend to downplay the work they do, but if portrayed in, like in the actual impact. So if you say that, oh, I wrote like a recommender system for my company, but if that recommender system has so much downstream impact that it helps them in XXX dollars and this much IP, that is definitely something you should highlight in your application. So having these sort of letters from the leadership who can attest to the work you're on technically, the impact it has, and the leading role you had in developing it, those are something that is very strongly looked at by the EB1 application. And then another thing in our case was we didn't apply for a bunch of different criteria. I think I had hit almost most of them, apart from patents. We didn't submit our patents. Yeah, we had almost most of them. But what I was advised to do was that go for like 2 or 3 really strong criteria rather than trying to just hit the bar by every criteria, because that's not viewed as strongly. So that's something that worked out in my favor. I'm not sure if that's still the case right now. And then finally, yes, and another point for EB1B I want to mention specifically was that one base prerequisite rather than a criteria is that you need to have at least 3 years of research experience. So this can be, I don't think this can be at your employer, but can be anywhere in the past. So as long as you have published papers in your master's program or, as part of an internship program or something, I think that can also count as part of your research experience. In my case, I think they also showed that at Google. So something to clarify, but that's like a base prerequisite to also show as part of this. One more minute. What else can I say that was pretty important?
Praneeth, I'll ask you a question to get people warmed up.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you again for for sharing the step-by-step how you discovered EB1 to how you got started, the mistakes you made, the good fortune you had, because that is important to acknowledge. There's you can do the best work, but then you can get an absolute weird officer who has a track record of rejections, and your thing gets rejected. There's a lot of things that can go wrong, but there's also a lot of things that could go right. And I loved your focus on things that you can control versus things that we have no control over, like getting awards. It's always in reaction mode. So I love that. One of the questions that I had for you was, in both EB1A and EB1B, lawyers say it, I have seen it through other people's stories and through mine, is the important nature original contribution has on your application. That is primarily the backbone of your application, and it
Yeah.
holds the anchors to everything else. So I heard about your story on publications. I heard about your story on reviewing. I heard about your story on awards and media attention, but didn't quite catch the original contribution. So I'm curious, in what way did you or your lawyers demonstrate that original contribution?
Okay, good question. I'll be honest, I'll have to go through the packet, but if my understanding of original contributions is that how is it something that you as an individual led the team towards doing something that's quite novel?
Mhm.
That's briefly it. Yeah, so I think for that, my lawyers highlighted the publications I've had, the media attentions it's had, and then there might have been a few other details on the impact it had as well, which isn't quite public. So I think they kind of showcase that along with the letters from the leads, as I mentioned, like senior vice president, senior director, showing that, oh, yes, we can confirm that he led this project, led a team of X, Y, and Z in doing this, and this is the impact that the novel algorithm had in this given space. So, um,
Yeah. Yeah, that's one thing that everybody keeps talking about. Like, there are two parts to it, right? Original contribution and major significance. So it was your
yeah.
novel algorithm, and the significance was the amount of revenue that you drove. And because of that, and the recognition that you garnered because of this. This is great. Thank you again. I'm going to open the floor up to folks. So keep your hands raised. People know how to do that. Yeah. Yes, no. Now is the time to raise your hand. Like there is a button on. Oh, there you go. Okay. So we are going to go through folks' questions. Let's keep it to one question per person, which means no sub questions. So wrap it up in one. All right. Who wants to go first? Whose hand was raised? Sunil's hand was raised. Oh, Pradeep now. All right. Pradeep, go for it.
Um, Pranit, have you able to show the revenue from the your senior managements? They are able to give the letters normally when we go ahead for the letter of recommendation.
I think, yeah, so for me personally, I don't think we had much of that. I had some other confidential stuff from previous, internship research work, but from what I've heard about people, what most people do is they show revenue as one sort of impact, one sort of impact. Um, I've also heard from an immigration lawyer that if you can show some sort of like IP transfer, so for example, if you develop something and it's like a patent and that patent was used by another company yeah, I think if that IP was used by other organizations and there's letters for that, that would also count as significant impact for like I think for the original contribution aspect, now that I'm remembering it. So if you can show that as well, any sort of impact being used downstream in industry or research, that should also count.
Yeah.
Thanks, sir. Pranit.
Also, I'm
Yeah.
going to
Thanks
put
for
the name of this person. His name is Nikin Tharan. He got his EB1A approved as an entrepreneur, and of late on LinkedIn, he has been creating a lot of posts about how you can quantify these. So Praneeth talked about the criteria, but Nikin does a good job and like just making these massive LinkedIn posts. So if I were you, I would immediately follow him and save all those posts because he made a post on this as well. All right, Monali, go
Yeah,
for it.
sure, Aditi. Thanks for
Of course. Monali, go for it. And people keep raising
Uh,
your.
Thanks, Aditi. Uh, so my question is about tech talks and all these review work that has come to Ranit's way. Um, I remember he saying that for peer reviews, he was getting requests from people already. But how did he approach to get into tech talks, or what exactly happened? How did he get all these invitations?
Yeah, great question. So I think there are a couple of channels, like there's one channel which again might be out of control, but there's other ways in which you can make it happen. The first one was I had already published in in the place. So there was a workshop, there was a conference, and there was a journal. So through them, I started getting the initial invitations, which I started doing every year after year, and for journals I continuously doing. But for folks who have not been publishing in these places, you can always request to be part of.
1 second. Hold on. Somebody's. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, you can always request. Most of these, I think, workshops and journals, at least in my space of AI, have these call for reviewers. So you can always volunteer. There is no guarantee that you're going to get it, but I think it's worth a shot, right? Worst case, you want to hear or no. What they're typically looking at is if you have any sort of past research experience, and the amount of research experience depends mostly on like the needs of the workshop and how reputed it is. I feel like the top tier workshops will want to make sure that you have some publications. Other ones might be a bit more lax, but I assume there'll be at least some relevance to your field that you're being invited to judge over there. So that's something you can look at, like cold calling and like looking up if the opportunities to review.
Thank you.
Monali, and for everyone, I don't know if you're there in the Slack community. That's also where Praneeth is as well. You can continue his conversation with him over there, or you can do it on LinkedIn. But I'm going to put the Slack link over here. There are 3 people in that Slack community for folks who are looking for reviewing opportunities and how to go about reviewing opportunities. We did a masterclass on that with, I'm going to put the name down over here, Siddharth Krishnan. He's a assistant professor in computer science at University of North Carolina, Charlotte. Abhinava Sivarao. He is an engineer in NVIDIA, and Tamanna Ramesh. She is in product in Coca-Cola. And these are the folks who led a masterclass about how to get reviewing opportunities as an industry professional. And they broke it down. How do you write reviewers? How do you cold email? Which workshops do you go for? Which conferences do you go to? How do you submit a review? How do you know if the review is good? All of it. So you can join that Slack community and hit up Siddharth, Krishnan, Abhinav, or Tamanna. They'll step you through it. All right. Sunil, go for it.
Yeah, thank you so much. So my question is like, I'm a person who has been working in industry. I don't have any research background. I just have masters in IT, and I don't have access to any data. So like, what will be your recommendation if somebody like me has to start writing in a journal, want to publish? Because I don't have access to any of the data which most of the researchers use. I'm not in a bank or a company which will share the data internally, and like I don't have even a basic experience of
Okay.
writing.
Okay. Good question. I think a lot of people have the similar, issue with reach out. So I guess like you said, MS and I mean IT, so I assume like some kind of the computer science field. So I think the first thing to figure out is what is an area you want to show as expertise for these criteria. So for example, you want to be like an AI like me or like
Like
distributed
I have
systems.
payments domain, yeah, within the IT, yeah,
Okay. Okay.
yeah, banking
Okay.
and payments.
Okay, cool. So now that you have, once you have that in mind, right, what I usually ask folks as a first step is, in your company itself, if there's a research team or I don't know, like in my case, a data science team that is doing some research, even if it's not in your org, given that you have social capital in the company you're in, and depending on how flexible they are with this, you can always ask that, hey, I know you're conducting a study which you might eventually publish. Would you be looking at collaborators, or this is how I can help with this? And um, depends on how they are or how it goes. Typically, people usually don't say no. Now, if that is not an option, a few of my friends have also been doing this, and I would say check with your company on this. You can reach out to academics. I think Aditi linked some of her colleagues who were in academia, and like just cold call them saying that, hey, I have these many years experience writing software. Can I be part of some of the research you're doing? Could you tell me more about it? I think they're more likely to respond if you know the research already, and if you offer to just help out pro bono or something. And as through that process, they might work on research which you'll be engaged in, that'll eventually be published, and that might open up all the other channels which I spoke about once that happens. So that's another option to consider. One thing I didn't really mention, I should have mentioned in the talk, is I think most of this is possible. The only requirement here is time and discipline. So it's extra time which you'll be having to spend to do all these things if it's not part of your core role.
Yeah, thank you so
Yeah.
Praneeth, do you also want to drop your TopMate link if folks want to continue their conversation with you? They have a way to reach out.
Yeah, of course. Let me first figure out what my TopMate link is. I think TopMate is great because that's where I like to help people. I just have too much going on in my LinkedIn. So yeah, so it's just my name. So let me type it out while someone wants to put the next question.
All right, Sai, go for it.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for the session, and it was very helpful. My question is, let's say I have some contributions from my PhD and my current role in the industry. My question is about, do they really have to have a lot of outside media attention, like general media? Does it have to be top 10%, so to say, or if I have some contributions, but they might not have, or they won't have very outside media attention. I guess I wanted to ask, is that necessary? If not, how can we show it in the application? Thank you.
Yeah, great question, Sai. So honestly, for most people who come from academia, like you mentioned, PhD, they do not have much media, right? Like
Yeah.
I know folks with like hundreds and thousands of citations, and they don't need to do all the things which I've been doing. So just to clarify, my talk, I've been speaking more as an outlier, like without any major academic experience, like less than 5 years of work experience. What are the auxiliary things you need to do if your citations and publications are not similar to that of like a freshly minted or PhD or a professor, right? So I think strictly speaking, by the USCS criteria, citations itself is not enough. But if you work with a lawyer, what they'll tell you is, oh, tell us more about your papers, highlight the importance, and then they'll be able to figure out what the other criteria is, right? But there's a high correlation between having high citations and, hitting some of the other USCIS criteria, which you can opt a lawyer to help you on. Yeah.
I see. Okay, so thank you.
Abhinaya, go for it.
Hey, thanks for the great talk. So my question is, how much do you think your role name, like you called yourself as a researcher in DeepMind, right? So how much do you think that is important? I'm just asking this because I am a machine learning engineer, and I was previously called data scientist. Now I'm an MLE, but all I do is the same thing, like applied ML. So the role names differ in different companies, but it's more of research in applied ML. So how do you think the name or the title is very important?
Yeah. My personal take, again, as a lawyer, it doesn't matter. You can be called like CTO and also get it. What my lawyer told me, like it's easier for them to, if you have the name like research in your title, it's easier for them to kind of filter out. But for USCIS, they just want evidence, that what you're doing is indeed research. And specifically, they'll ask for those attested letters that you had at least 3 years of research experience. So I don't think title matters as much, just that your lawyers would then have to justify, even if you're like a SWE machine learning or data scientist, how is that original research? So yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's go for it. All right.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So, Praneeth, thank you so much for this. I am curious. I would appreciate if there's a way for us to connect on a more one-on-one basis. But my question is more around you clearly seem to be a busy guy. How do we get connected, and how should I kind of schedule time on your calendar so that I know when you're available and I can like sync based on my availability too?
My availability is it's usually on weekends. I think first of all, I mean, I'm available on TopMate, but just to save everyone, because there's a lot of stuff you can pre-read that's already on the internet. So I would like usually recommend go through that. And if you have targeted questions based on your like the kind of questions getting right now is more specific on like, oh, this is my background, how can I do X, Y, and Z? Feel free to add time on TopMate. I posted a link on the chat and I'm happy to answer that. I'm also happy to answer more generic questions, but like for those, just to save yourself time, you can look them online. But otherwise, yeah, feel free to reach out on TopMate.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Praneeth, TopMate is in the chat, by the way. 15 more minutes, Abhijit, and then Ishan.
Hey, hi, thanks for the session. I have a question on like reviewing the technical books, like a programming books in the digital and even the like a print media. So is this considered as like a reviewing something like a papers or like it is not considered at all?
Sorry, so did you publish or did you review over here?
No, I have reviewed the books.
Okay. Yeah, I think that should definitely help. Like as long as it's in your field of expertise, so like it's in what you do more broadly. I think what the lawyers might ask for is some sort of proof that you got an invitation to review, and then once you've completed the review, or I think maybe even the latter one is good enough, and then they might ask some reputation about the publishing house or the book or something. But if you have that, that should count as the judging criteria.
Okay, got it. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
All right, Ishan.
Hey, hi. Thanks. This is very helpful. I had a question. It's slightly from the other end in the sense that I've done a lot of work in writing some reports, and some of them have gotten really a lot of media exposure across government and like across other media organizations as well. Is academic presence a strong requirement in the sense that do I need to have published articles in journal of XYZ? Yeah, I mean, I typically write industry reports or like, things like that, but also my role is quite research based. So yeah.
Yeah, great question. So my interpretation after doing this was that as long as it's peer reviewed, right? And someone has reviewed it and said confirmation that it can be approved or rejected, that should be fine. USCIS, I think they kind of over-index on journals and top conferences. But I also know for things like workshops, you can, as long as you put in the or workshops or technical reports or whatever, as long as you can put in the proof that, oh, it's a venue for your field, which is reasonably respected, which I think most things should be, and someone has reviewed the articles, that's fine. If it's things like Medium blog posts, I'm not I'm not saying yours Medium blog post, but I'm just thinking of one example. I'm not as sure to talk to a lawyer, but what people have been doing is they have been basically converting that on open research venues like Archive. So doing that at least allows it to be indexed by Google Scholar, and then someone might decide to cite your technical report, and you can at least show citations, and then even though that might not strictly hit the peer review bar, but a good lawyer should be able to show that as an evidence of impact in the field. So yeah, I think a technical report should count if it's impactful. It's just like which channel do you put it on to maximize the impact.
Cool, thanks.
Yep.
All right, Keir and then Jenny.
Do you want, can I go forward since
Hey,
Kian?
hey, Aditi. Hey, Pranit.
No.
Thanks for arranging this. So,
Keir
quick question.
is here. Jenny, let's take Keir's question and then you, okay?
So, my question was, did artificial intelligence help in your case because you're a bachelor's plus artificial intelligence?
Yeah, so I my highest education was like master's. I don't think they looked at education as much. But yeah, I mean, my entire EB1, as I mentioned, you have to choose the domain of expertise, the base
Right.
foundation. And for me, it was just like, yeah, machine learning, AI, I think specifically applied AI, and showing how it was able to help in so many different domains. So I think for everything, it was something or the other related to my work in the field of machine learning.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
Jenny.
Okay, hi Pranit, hi Aditi. Thank you for the session. I have a question on the award criteria. So there's this award I'm targeting, Outstanding Reviewers Award. So I don't know if this sort of award fits into the criteria for EB1.
Okay. So I think for what I've been told about awards, but I've been hearing conflicting things about them, is as long as it's, not something done in university, right? Like it's not like something you want in college, but it is for professionals in your field. It's open to them. I've heard things like Forbes 30 under 30 also have age limits, so those might not be considered as much, but I'm not sure. But yeah, as long as it's like something for professionals in the field, and it's there's no other such barrier for people to apply for it, that should count. And I think that should also help you with your judging the work of others criteria as well. So I would recommend putting that in.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Shashank. Also, by the way, Shashank is the last person who I see his hands raised. We still have 9 more minutes with Praneeth. Just saying, use this time with him. All right, Shashank, go for it.
Sure. Thank you for the session. So I have question on the original contribution criteria. So I was wondering, let's say we do some original work in our company. However, the employer has restriction on taking that work in the public domain, or converting into a paper, or talking about in the media. So I want to understand, like, how do we show the major significance part in that case?
Yeah, okay. Another great question. I think a lot of people have the same issue, right? Like in my case, I just simply did not include it. Like there's so many things which our group had done, but it would have been a challenge getting that out publicly just given how strategically important they were. So I couldn't show that. And I just like basically kept showed the other things which were more public and they were open to be publicly shared. In your case, more generally, I think what could be done for things such as this is you can have the recommendation letters, right? And then leadership can speak in whatever level of secrecy that, oh, this person additionally contributed to X, Y, and Z project, and this had impact in, this much launch, like millions or billions in revenue or whatever, and we attested to that. That's something you can show. Another thing I've noticed is like for these sort of like secret projects, like there's a high correlation with them being patented, right? So if you do have, proof of that, I'm not sure patent has not been accepted counts as much as one has been filed, but you could also take evidence of that being sent for filing or something, if you do have it, of course. And that should also highlight original contribution. It won't be a main criteria, it can be an auxiliary one that hints to the work you've done with the company, if that is possible. Yeah, none of that's possible. What I did was I just like focused on the projects which could be more publicly shared in some form or the other, and focused on that.
Praneeth, I'm going to take this time to ask this question. You work for a giant company, and I've had this question come in to me from other folks, and I know that you also practice a lot of caution in terms of like disseminating information, because you have to be accountable to the large employer that you work for. So I'm curious to know, as you were putting your work out there, as your name is going out there, was there any time where HR reached out to you and any such precautionary movement that you had to use before you sent out and said something because your name is attached to this big company? What advice would you have on that front?
Yeah, that's another great question. I was ultra cautious in this regard. I've let everybody in my, larger org, my leadership know that this is what I wanted to do. We have a very big compliance and comms team within our org. So we have a process for every time I speak or give a talk, something about my research or anything relevant to what I do at work. We have an approval process. I always submit all of that in the scenarios where, I'm also happy to submit like intermediate proofs that, are you okay this going out? So I assume most organizations have this sort of mechanism rather than being a blanket no. If you can explain that, oh, this is done for immigration purposes, you can go through the approval channels, let them see what it is. And then as long as you're not speaking something completely out of script from what you showed with them, it should be fine, right? So I would say work with the company and try to get as much, shown beforehand rather than, throwing surprises at them once it's out and then, that could land you in trouble. So yeah, I know with, working in certain industries and, the work you do can be more confidential and it's trickier, and it might be something that's frustrating to some folks to actually, rather than working on the process of it to work out. But it's just the nature of industry, you have to be very careful with what you speak out there publicly.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, half of immigration woes or trauma that you have from this process comes from surprises. So the surprised you are about this, the better it is. So just know all the things that could go possibly wrong. I was talking to somebody, he works in, again, one of the big companies, and their HR reached out to him and said, hey, this article that you've written, you have to recall that because we cannot stand by it. So you might have to practice these cautionary movements that Praneeth also did. I'm going to ask Keer, Ishan, and Sunil to wait for a second. I know Pranali has not had a chance to ask a question, so let Pranali ask a question, and then if we have time, we'll go to you folks. Pranali, go for it.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Thank you. I'm sorry I joined very late. So I have a question about EB1B. Can I ask? Is it okay? I mean, I just want. Good. So about organization who is supporting your EB1B, I know there are distinguished organization, etc. And for private organization, it may not be that strict. I came to know from attorney. So I'm in a partnership with some doctors, and I'm basically started research, and I got a lot of trials in just 2 months. They are in medical field for 30 years, the doctors, and they have their well-established practices. But in terms of research, they have done in the past, but they discontinued because of not finding the right professionals, research professionals. And so they are supporting my EB1B. So having a not so much big organization and still supporting EB1B, my profile is very strong as compared to their research profiles, but their profile is strong in terms of their clinical specialty. So what do you think, what could be the challenge we will get? And I'm not going to submit my EB1B before I actually start number of trials, So I do have that contract, everything. We're going to support, show that during the application that I got so much business. But what could be the challenge we could face, and how strong or how well established the organization should be in order to who's supporting your EB1B?
Yeah, okay. That's a great question. So on how strong the organization should be, I'm not exactly sure. What I've heard from the lawyers is if there's any proof on the impact on the company. So you mentioned medical and doctors. If there's any articles on them on media from good media houses, and there's information about the company, that should be good enough. I personally don't think that, if you work at the big tech company everyone wants to work in versus like a smaller company, it makes much of a difference, right? On the second thing, on the support letters from these, I think leadership position doctors who are going to write your letters, if I understand correctly. I think that's okay. Like I've had people write me letters who had thousands of citations, but now that they are in leadership positions, they are not publishing as much, right? Like they published a lot, back when they were a postgrad or just started working. But right now, if you look at the last few years, it's not as much. So I think that should be fine. I think your attorneys will just say that have they been an academic at some time in the past? And naturally, now that they are in a leadership position in the field, like it's maybe not expected as much for them. So they should have the expertise given their past research background to talk about your work in the field, even though your work, as you're saying right now, is much more prevalent than theirs. So that should be okay. But yeah, for that case, just talk to the lawyer. If that taking a letter from them should be fine.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Praneeth, quick request. We have 3 people with their hands raised. I'll just ask them to go one after the other, sandwich the questions, and you give a mega answer. Is that cool?
Yeah, sounds good.
Here, Ishan and Sunil, less than 30 seconds to ask your question. Ask it, and then Praneeth is going to answer all together. Kier, go for your question.
Hey, Praneeth, I have 2 questions. My first question is, I have 15 years of experience in the industry, but my industry is banking and finance. And the research that PhD that I'm currently doing is in fake news detection. So the domains are different. So will that be a problem in my application for EB1A? That's my first question.
Hold on for a quick second, Praneeth, because we don't have time to go through everybody. So I'm just going to write these questions down. So domain different. What's your next question?
Is there any difference between US patents and India patents, and what are things we need to be looking for?
Okay. Okay. Domain question, is that a domain different? Is that a problem? Ishan, what's your question?
Sure. Did you consider self-sponsorship for EB1? Yes, no. Perspectives would be great. Yeah.
Okay. And Sunil?
Yeah, a similar question like Ishan. If you had your lawyer as an employee, the employer lawyer, like what are the challenges you face?
Yeah. Okay. So domain different, is that a problem? US patents versus India patents, self-petition versus employee petition, employer's lawyer versus your own lawyer. Go for it.
Okay. Cool, thanks. I'll start at the easiest one first. So US patent, India patent, I have no idea. It's a question for a lawyer. Self-sponsorship, so EB1B, right? That has to be sponsored by a company. You cannot, that's the difference between EB1B and EB1A. So EB1A, feel free to self-sponsor. I mean, there are plenty of good lawyers out there. Feel free to use EB1B, unfortunately, it has to be sponsored by a company, right? So I went to my company. Domain different. So I don't think so. You said you did an MS in IT and now you're doing fake detection and that kind of stuff. I don't think education background matters as much. Like maybe if you were doing something like biotech or something and now you're on this, maybe it would. this seems reasonably okay. I would focus on the research you're doing right now and you have control over. So if you think you can build a profile out of, fake media detection and that line of work, just focus on that as your area and then build all the criteria around it. Shouldn't be much of a problem. I did my undergrad in EC, electronics engineering, as I mentioned. So